Okay, sorry for the interruption. I just recap that we're going to have 15 minutes each. And I think we're going to have Dr. Aziz first. So each of these panelists is welcome to speak to different aspects of teaching, teaching philosophy and ideas that would make teaching effective in the classroom, including development of syllabus. How do you provide students with experiential learning? So we're going to begin first with Dr. Aziz.
All right, thank you. And I have the paper now. Huh? You can't find it. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tunji Aziz. I'm a professor of theater, film, and cultural studies at Lagos State University, and the current dean of the faculty at School of Tourism. It's so exciting to be here, but I'll start by asking one question. We have so many teachers here. I want to presume, is there anybody who was trained specifically to be a teacher? Okay, about 3, but we have many of us who are not taught, who are not in education as a prof. So that is the concern of my paper today. And when I spoke with the organizers, with Professor Adirito, what he wanted me to share is how we have coped teaching in an environment like Nigeria. So my paper is titled Teaching in an African University, the place of a teaching philosophy in navigating the challenges. Next slide. Where? You just be controlling it. Let me be telling you to control it. Yeah, where? Which one is?
Change.
Okay. Okay. All right, so the paper begins by asking the question, what is education? Because you cannot create a philosophy of teaching without understanding what education actually is. So here we have the definition of education, and all the definitions agree on one thing, that it is, transmission of values, knowledge, skill to the next generation. Because you must have something that you want to pass on. And in most society, you find out that, as we said here, human beings are born without culture or any knowledge. Therefore, there must be a way that we teach or we pass on knowledge and values, to the next generation. And that is what teaching is. That is what education is. It is therefore the duty of the society to give guidance, moral, spiritual, social, economic, and cultural, to children or anybody coming to the society for the first time. And the lot of doing this falls on the person that we call the teacher. Sorry. So now we also need to understand the purpose of education. Because without understanding the purpose of education, of what you want to impart, you cannot form a philosophy that is going to guide you in discharging your duty or instruction to people. So what are the purpose of education? It is, all over the cultures, whether we have, from the Greek era to the primitive era, to modern times, the primary purpose of education across culture is to build better citizens that will uphold the values of the society. And it's a process whereby children born in society are imbued with necessary knowledge and skills that will make them function in their various and specific roles in society. That word specific roles means that there are people who have been trained, for instance, to be rulers. So in palaces, princes and princesses are taught how to behave. Artisans are given their own training. So there are specific roles that everybody is expected to play in society. Therefore, a teacher is that person who serves as the instructor and guide in the transmission of knowledge, skills, and values, typically in an educational setting. We also need to understand that in the past, people see pastors, priests as teachers, parents as teachers. Why is that so? It is so because if you look at society, traditional society, I don't want to use the word primitive. I want to say traditional society. Everybody in the society knows what the society wants. So whether you are a parent, you are a chief, the idea is to build, to transmit the values of your culture to your children so that they can continue in that tradition. So everybody is seen as a teacher. And especially in African society, Yorubas will say, that is, only two people give birth to a child, but the entire community trains the child, which means that the society is seen as a teacher. But that is possible because the knowledge that they want to transmit is known by everybody in society. How to behave, how not to behave, how to talk, how not to talk, and so on and so forth. Everybody knows it. Now, sorry. Yeah. So, now as society begins to grow, the knowledge available to be transmitted became so diverse. So many that we now need specialists to teach certain things. It has gone beyond parents imparting knowledge in their children, or a king imparting knowledge, giving some values to society. It has gone beyond that level. So it has moved to a level whereby you now have specialized skills or knowledge that now people need to learn to transmit to other people. And you see, the type of education that we now give to children or anyone who wants to be in society is a major factor in deciding what your philosophy will be as a teacher. Also, we need to understand that education can be formal or informal. In traditional society, it was informal. But later, the formal one was introduced by having age groups. You understand? They now begin to give them structures, ideas. You belong to societies, to organizations, they begin to give you values. For instance, those who want to be priests, like Babalawo or whatever, will go to a special school. Those who want to be artisans will go to a special school. In Yoruba culture, for instance, every household used to have a particular trade that they have. That's why you have those who are drummers, their lineage will be drummers. Those who are chanters, their lineage will be chanters. Those who are priests, their lineage will be, made of priests. That means they have social skills that they are giving, that they are giving out. Sorry? It's not moving, no. It's not moving. Let me just be saying, yeah, it's not moving. Let me just continue. Oh, yeah. So, teacher, okay, yeah, I've said this, so just move on. Now, for every teacher, there must be a philosophy. That this is how I want to be teaching. And what is a philosophy then? A teaching philosophy is a personal reflection and statement that outlines an educator's beliefs, his values, and approaches to teaching and learning. And I believe so strongly that the type of teacher that you are is a reflection of who you are as a person. It is very difficult for you to to go against who you are. So if you are a patient person, for example, you are going to be a patient teacher. If you are not patient, you have to learn the art of patience before you can teach. So we also need to understand that this philosophy is not static, because the teacher, like any other person in society, is a product of the society. Therefore, that philosophy may change. It can be modified and even jettisoned at the time. And that's why you find that some people begin as teachers today, and the next minute they're out of teaching and they go into something else. There's no time we are witnessing that more than now in Africa, particularly in Nigeria. Because at the point in time, those who wanted to be teachers, just review their philosophy of life and then review their philosophy of teaching and said, look, teaching is not for me. I want to move to something else. Sorry. Now, what do we need to do before we say we want to write a philosophy of teaching? You have to ask yourself, what are my core beliefs, values about life? You need to ask, who really am I? You need to ask yourself, what are my expectations in life? And this is very important, because if your expectation is to become a millionaire, a multi-millionaire, then you must know that this is not a place for you to achieve that. Can being a teacher fulfill my dream? That will be asked before you write a philosophy. What else can I do if I don't teach? You must ask that question. It's very, very important. At what level do I want to teach and why? There are people who are suited to teach in nursery school. There are some who are prepared to teach in primary schools. There are some who are, called for the university. If you take some of us who are teachers in university to a secondary school, we'll be speaking above their levels. So, how many minutes? 4 minutes. I didn't start on time. Okay. Okay, let me just rush fast. Sometimes you now get the job and become a teacher. Now you are a teacher, but you have challenges. And please note that I'm making this specifically to tie to the Nigerian factor. In Nigeria, environment where we function as teachers. Where are the students that I want to teach? Who are the students, and do they believe in education at all? We are in an environment where we say education is a scam. And you have written your philosophy that you are going to do this and that to achieve this. Your students are not ready. That's a disconnect. What are their immediate and future needs? You must know that as a teacher, especially in the university system, because they may have different aspirations from what you are teaching. Then how do I connect with them? And when they believe that school is a scam. Then you also need to ask yourself, when you have these challenges, what do I do? Should I follow the steps of my teachers? Yes, sometimes not, because you are not the same as your teacher. Please, are the students, please, can you remove that thing? Are the students like my generation? As a teacher, you must understand generational differences. You have been teaching for 30 years. You cannot use the same approach that I've been using even 5 years ago. Now, it's not going to work. What new things do I need to learn as a teacher, to deliver quality instructions? That means that the teacher must continue to train and retrain himself or herself. This is not moving again. Oh. Next, please. Now, you have to now admit some things, and I want to share this now from my own personal experiences now. You have to admit the generational divides and differences between teacher and students. You and your students are not the same age, so they won't reason like you. What makes sense to you will not make sense to them. Admit generational divides between students and students. The student that you taught 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and you have another set of students, they are not the same. You can't talk to them the same way. You have to admit structural deficiencies that we have in the system. We just witnessed one here now. There's no light. We have to admit it and ask yourself, do I want to continue? We have to admit curricular deficiencies. For instance, you want to teach experience studies. What does experience study? What value does it add to their lives? You'll be asking that question. Please, next. Then, You have to seek new ways of teaching the same content imposed on you by the system, by the curriculum. You can't change the curriculum. It is that way. Recently, you see that they are showing some children, Chinese students, children, learning some skills and so on and so forth. That is the national philosophy of the state. Now you cannot change the national philosophy. You are confined to teach it. How do you teach it in a way that will connect with their lives now? Then you have to stimulate interest of students by connecting with their realities. And without doing that, there's no way you can make any headway. Then don't compare yourself too much with those in other sectors. And what do I mean by this? You are a teacher. You have chosen that profession. Your colleague who had a third class is somewhere in one company, is making money. Once you begin to do that, it's going to affect your philosophy. Definitely going to affect it. Next. Then you have to interrogate personal and professional philosophy. That is, who am I again? Then that's when challenges come. Then identify mentors and role models. This is very important because you must have teachers, those who taught you that you can look up to. Then the next one is you have to be in the home of your students. Okay. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? The internet is where the young generation now live. If you are not at that space with them, you won't understand what is happening and their mindset and all that stuff. So on this point, finally, at their desk and they die. We have lost many of them that way. Those are challenges that we are facing in Nigeria and as teachers, and which these are my own observations, and how we can go about it to how to stay true to our philosophy of teaching. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aziz. We have 3 other participants online. Do we have Furera? I don't think so. Okay. Can we go on with Dr. Eric Covey, Grand Valley State University, Michigan?
Hi,
Dr. Covey,
thank
can you hear
you.
me? Go ahead, thank you.
Hello.
Hello?
So thank you. Can you hear me? I hope
Yes,
so.
we can. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Professor Aziz, first of all, for that kind of lead-in presentation on teaching. I hope everyone there and on the Zoom session today was taking notes, because there are, I think, so many important pieces of advice in there, and I'll probably hit on a few of them today. I don't have a prepared paper or any kind of PowerPoint, but I'll start. I teach at Grand Valley State University in West Michigan. I've also taught at the University of Abuja in Nigeria several years ago. So that's kind of the direction I'm coming from. And when Professor Adorinto emailed me several weeks ago after I wanted to be on this panel, I jumped at the opportunity because teaching is really, at this kind of point in my career, the thing I care most about, more than the kind of research. Line change, an international virtual exchange where Slack or WhatsApp at this point. And just in the last few months, actually changed. I was teaching in women's history in the Department of History, and now I've moved to the Department of International, and there was a late change to my course schedule, and I was teaching several different courses to teaching 4 sections of the same course, but the 4 sections were quite different. There were 2 in-person courses, and then 2 versions of that course were going to be online. So it reminded me of a lot of the kinds of particularities and challenges, I think, of teaching online courses versus teaching the same course, right, in person. So in a sense, right now, I'm not just to teach 4 different versions of one course. I'm prepping to teach what amounts to really 2 different courses, because an online course should not look like an in-person course. It won't work in the same way. So before I kind of go into that and get at what I think are some of the best practices for online teaching, I do want to point out and maybe even reinforce a few of the things that Professor Aziz has already said. So in this session, of course, and I think Dr. Aziz's was really useful, thinking about teaching specifically in Nigeria, right? And during your kind of teaching career, you may find yourself teaching in all kinds of different settings, right? Different kind of national settings, Nigeria, the UK, Canada, the US, China, depending on kind of how your career goes, where you go. And all of those will be very different. As Dr. Aziz pointed out, Nigeria has a specific curriculum. US schools, based on different states, also have very particular curriculum. So that will always kind of hem you in, the particular content you have to teach. But based on your teaching philosophy, you can teach that content in very different ways. And then, of course, another kind of context that will shape your teaching is, where you are. Are you at a polytechnic university? Are you at a state college? Are you at a large research university? Here in the United States, I would think of the difference between teaching like I do at a fairly large, but still a state university where I do most of the teaching, as opposed to being at a research university like the University of Chicago, where maybe there are many graduate students in the department who would do a lot of the teaching for you, which myself I wouldn't want. I like working with students and kind of having that intimacy. And then, of course, as Dr. Aziz's discussion of generational differences pointed out, or developing any of your courses. And in online courses, I think this holds maybe doubly true for, is you need to think about who these learners are. For instance, here at Grand Valley, where I'm teaching these different courses, the students in my online courses will be somewhat different. Many more of them will be kind of working, perhaps they live at a distance from the university, they'll be older, the demographics are different, thinking again about kind of generations. So, as best you can, whatever kind of teaching scenario you're in, it's always really important to know who the learners are, who you're teaching. And then, of course, one of the things that will shape the kind of teaching you do, again, whether it's face-to-face or online or perhaps hybrid kind of teaching, is your own role and institutional status, right? So depending, here in the US at a research university, a professor might find themselves teaching just 2 classes a semester with small role at a state university like 4 courses. And perhaps for many professors, 80% of the temporary, contingent, or part-time employees at the university, they might find themselves teaching 6. So your kind of own teaching load, how many courses you have to teach, how many student papers you have to read, if you're teaching at different institutions, all those kind of things inevitably affect, beyond your teaching philosophy, how you're even able to teach. So good. And then I think finally too, when it comes to teaching, and especially online teaching, institutional support is very important. Again, depending on what university you're at in Nigeria or anywhere else, there may be a more robust kind of institutional space, a center for teaching and learning, perhaps, a center for online distance and education that might be able to kind of offer you support, assistance, a space to share with other teachers your experiences, the kind of challenges you face. So moving toward thinking a little bit about online teaching, again, I think a lot of the things are the same as in-person teaching. Ultimately, most of you will hopefully be building or working toward ability of inquiry, where you're kind of dynamically working with your students to Certainly impart knowledge to them in terms of content, but also for them to learn to do research themselves, for them to learn to write themselves, for them to learn to use this kind of knowledge, right, that they're gaining in the classroom to do things, to better their lives, to better their country, to simply kind of enrich their own lives in whatever way. Uh, and again, I don't think the sage on the stage model is the best approach to teaching in general. What I call the baby bird model, where mama bird and papa bird catch worms and feed them to the baby bird. I think the best kind of classrooms should be dynamic, should be spaces of institutional learning, and doing that online represents a particular challenge, I think, because there's often a tendency to imagine, again, an online course as just being a duplicate of the face-to-face version. And that might be for some people simply posting all of your lecture notes or recording all of your lectures and then posting those, to whatever kind of learning management system you're using, whatever online platform you're teaching through. But I don't think that's going to be very effective because there's several things through lots of educational research we know are important to helping learners succeed online. And number one would be a sense of belonging. Again, that they're part of a classroom, right? That they're engaged in some kind of community of inquiry and not just logging on to listen to lectures and then taking an exam. That's not really a classroom. I don't think an online course works best when it's self-paced, when a learner can just kind of log on and move through everything in a very solitary way together. To some degree, I think online courses can do that. That's an advantage of them, but I don't think they should focus on that. I think it's really important to do things like with the online courses that I teach, but then also with the international virtual exchange that students at Leeds City and here in Grand Valley did, one of the things we did is to post short introduction videos online so that everybody in Ibadan and everybody here in Michigan had a sense of each other, where people introduced themselves, what they were studying, what kind of things they liked to do outside of school, things that were important to them, cultural artifacts, for instance. The game we played was based on repatriation of the Benin bronzes. So establishing the different ways in which people connected to material objects was kind of important. But with an online class at a single university, you have students kind of post these so they can get to know there are other real human beings in this class with kind of, different passions, different interests, and kind of put faces with names. So to establish that there's a community here, this isn't just some, kind of isolated online space. And at the same time, you have to do that for yourself. So belonging is important in an online course. And I think a second thing that's important is to establish a presence, especially the instructor, right? So at the beginning, students can do that by posting short videos or even written kind of introductions, if bandwidth or recording videos is a challenge for them. But for the professor in particular, I think it's important to maintain a presence throughout the semester every week. Again, I guess you could post all your notes or your PowerPoints, or you could record a bunch of lectures and then post those online and then not think about the course the rest of the semester. But for me, one of the things I like to do is when I set a course up, there are different kind of units, unit 1, unit 2, basic skills and historiography or whatever the kind of units are based around, with exercises, readings, things for the students to do. But I like to, as the semester goes along, record a fresh video every week. So when we go into week 3 of the semester, it shouldn't just be a timeless video, your notes from 10 years ago, or your PowerPoints from 10 years ago, or the lecture you recorded 3 semesters ago. It's a video that I took at the beginning of the week where I mentioned something from that week. Oh, I see it's very rainy this week, or Harmattan's been particularly hard on me this week. You're still present in the class. You're still keeping, kind of up with them. So that kind of belonging and then also that presence of the instructor are really important in class. And I think a third thing finally would be the idea of reflection. You know, again, there's kind of content to deliver in whatever kinds of demands the university places on you. Perhaps you're at a federal university in Nigeria, and you have to have 80%, you know, of the course should come from the final exam, and 20% of the course comes from continuing kind of exercises in the class. I think one of the things you need to have the students also doing so that they maintain a presence is writing reflections. Whatever kind of content you're delivering, whatever kinds of exercises they're doing, they should also be kind of staying connected cognitively to their learning. So not just writing what they've learned or practicing the skills they've learned, but reflecting on actually the process of learning itself, thinking about what they find challenging in the online learning environment, talking about things that have been kind of unclear to them, you know, finding ways to connect topics that perhaps came up in class to other students' introduction videos. So I think that, you know, belonging, presence of both the instructor and students, and then reflection are three of the really most important things to incorporate in an online course, really to think about those three things you know, in a very kind of conscious, concerted way. And then finally, the last two pieces of advice I will say is that if you're designing an online course, again, you can't just take the course you have and turn it into an online course. One of the things that became quickly apparent during the pandemic is that doesn't work. It takes quite a while to develop a course and to kind of make those changes. So you need to be very intentional from the start and to be thinking about how does this work online? How do I interact online? If there's generational differences, how do my students interact differently online with material than I do? You could look towards your children if you have children. How do they interact with electronic kind of internet media differently? And then finally, just the last kind of piece of advice I'll give, and then I'll let Professor Wolf go, is that you should start from the finish when you're designing a course. Think about what your learning outcomes are for the course. At the very end of the course, what do you want your students to be able to know or to do? And then design backward from there. So backward design, how do I get students from this kind of point at the beginning where I don't know what they know, what skills they have, they could all be different. What kinds of things can I do in the class to get them to the finish line? The finish line is really important. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Eric. I think that was great too. So we're gonna have our last speaker, Dr. Rebecca Wolf from Christopher Newport University. So you have 15 minutes, and then we can have a few minutes to round up.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And thank you to Dr. Aziz and Dr. Covey for sharing those insights. I found particularly insightful that Dr. Aziz mentioned with the teaching philosophy that it is constantly changing. Once you have your teaching philosophy, you're not beholden to that. You know, new studies come out, you have new experiences in the classroom. Your teaching philosophy is pliable and malleable, and it changes as you change. And also Dr. Covey's comments about building community is so important. Not only, I mean, on online classes, it's especially important while people are navigating physical distances from each other. But, you know, having community where there's buy-in in the classroom and students can take responsibility for their learning is really important. A little bit of background about where I'm coming from. I teach at Christopher Newport University. It is a public school in Virginia in the United States, focused on undergraduate education. Professors generally at my school have either a 3-3 teaching load or a 4-4 teaching load. So I teach about three classes every semester. And there's really a very small graduate population there, almost non-existent. So I'm the one in the classroom teaching the students, grading their work, all of that. And I teach art history. the different classes that I teach everything from an introduction class from global, from prehistoric cave paintings throughout, ancient art, Greek, Roman, through, Chinese medieval art, Japanese art, South Asian art, African art, this huge global survey, European medieval art, African art, global modern and contemporary art, and then courses specifically designed to help students with their writing. And I am somewhat new to being a teacher. I got my PhD in 2021, and I jumped right into a university teaching job, and that's where I've been. So a caveat is that I actually feel like I'm figuring out a lot of these things myself. It's a process. It's really a never-ending process. And that you'll continue on throughout the entirety of your year or your lives, your career. And I feel like I'm kind of at the beginning of my journey to figuring out how to most effectively teach. And of course, changing as students change, as the generations continue to come through as you're teaching. As I was starting out, and Dr. Covey mentioned this, I found particular help at my university. I'm lucky to be at a university that does have a center for education. It's called the Center for Effective Teaching. They hold workshops. Before my first semester, I participated in all the workshops that they had to offer. It helped to build syllabi. It helped to build active learning opportunities so that you weren't just lecturing at students. It introduced me to these types of activities that I didn't even know existed, that I now incorporate really regularly into my own classes. So if you have that type of resource available to you, definitely use it. Those centers for education also will bring in kind of peer people to sit in on your classes and provide constructive feedback, which can also be really useful. And so one of the things that I really try to think about when I am designing a class or tweaking a class is finding the balance between content and skill building. You want to make sure that students are getting the information that you need them to get. Either if you're working with a certain curriculum where you are leading them to a final exam and they have to know certain things for that final exam, or if you are just like, I'm teaching African art and they need to know about, Ile Ife, they need to know about Ashanti, that there's things that you need to cover that they need to leave the class knowing, and skill building that will help them kind of beyond, all knowledge will help them beyond the classroom. But things like research literacy, information literacy, communication skills, critical thinking and reading skills, those types of things. So finding the balance between content and helping students develop those kind of skills is something that I am constantly trying to keep in my head, not just planning the overall course design for the entire semester, but really down to each individual class period that I have. How am I going to incorporate both of those things? What I tend to do is there's a balance between lecture and then more active student engagement. So students either discussing a reading or perhaps looking at an art object on the screen and talking in small groups about them amongst themselves, breaking down what they see, what they think what they see might mean, things like that. So kind of combining between more lecture and discussion or active learning. And then one of the things that Dr. Covey mentioned that I have found that is really helpful in my own is that in developing your syllabus and your assignments, start from the end. Come up with your student learning outcomes, learning goals, or classroom goals first, and those established, you can tailor your topics and you can tailor it to meet those goals, so that you are ensuring that the students are learning what you want them to learn and building the skills that you want them to build. And then for developing syllabi specifically, I found that it's really helpful because I know this was mentioned at the beginning that as academics, we are trained in our PhDs, we go so focused and narrow in what we are researching and our knowledge base. And then when we're asked to teach, we're then asked to teach these generalized courses. And so it can be overwhelming when you've spent all that time getting to be an expert in this very specific subfield to then, teach an intro in the entire discipline where you're covering everything across the globe of various different times. So what is helpful is to look at example syllabi that other people have produced, veteran teachers or friends, colleagues, and see, how you don't have to like copy everything that they're doing, but have an idea about how people are structuring their classes. What are they including? Are there particular readings that you see popping up over and over again? Textbooks, things like that to help, generate your own ideas. What looks successful that you might want to incorporate, and what doesn't that you might not want to incorporate. That I always try to have one kind of field trip or engagement elsewhere outside of the classroom. So and I am able to bring students to museums to look at African art firsthand. These are students who are in the United States who have maybe seen African art, maybe have not seen African art, have certain ideas in their heads, what African art is. And so actually going and looking at physical objects is something that really gets students excited. And then having assignments attached to those objects. So, you're looking and thinking about, display and how that shapes our understanding of African objects as well. And if you're planning those types of things, Nigeria also has a lot of great places that you can bring your students and visit, especially in terms of art and culture. Always have a backup plan, always be flexible. People who are supposed to give you a tour of the galleries might have to cancel last minute. That's happened to me. Have a backup plan, be able to kind of pivot when those things arise so that you and your students can still have it and getting out of the classroom. And I found that it helped with their engagement.
Dr. Wolf, you have 3 minutes to round up.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's basically it, what I have to say. So,
All right.
yeah.
Wow, is it gone? Okay. Okay, now I think, yeah, this is great. Even as a teacher for more than 20 years, you pick up something, you learn something every day. I think this is a great opportunity for old, new teachers, right? We're going to open it up for a few questions, and then I'll have a minute or two to summarize. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so if your question is for the general panel, please to indicate that.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Mojida Abdulalim from Ahmadu Bello University. My question is for all the panelists. While they were speaking about teaching in general, I think I want to put this across. I'm sure in one way or the other, we all know that teaching has been adapted a lot in contemporary teaching. Many of us use the internet. Many of us adapt our teachings, whether it's hybrid or whether it's physical or whether it's virtual. So there's a lot of hybridity teaching going on. There's a lot of adapted teaching going on. And you spoke to some of these things in bits, but I think there's a register for it. So I'm interested in new curriculums for pedagogies in teaching. That's where my interest is. So I think it's something that as teachers and as old and new teachers, we need to understand that apart from breathing the generation barrier by teaching, having a teaching philosophy, we need to know that realistically, AI teaching, machine learning teaching, there's a lot of adaptability and adaptations that are going on in teaching. And I think this needs to be put into consideration. Thank you.
So, should we take one more question and then you can respond? Please, yeah.
Yeah, good evening all. My name is Dominic. Sir, Prof, with regard to your introduction, you made mention about applying interdisciplinary in your method of teaching. And Prof. Aziz talked about skills in the teaching. And my question is, there are times some lecturers will assign their master students to go and teach their class, maybe their final year students, knowing fully well that this master student do not have the requisite skill. So my question is this acceptable? If it is not, what do we do maybe to avoid that or to discourage that?
Okay, ma'am, and then they will respond, please.
Yeah,
Maybe you will respond.
I'm at President. Okay, my first question is to I am Ilupeju Tarika. I'm from the University of Lagos, History Department. So my first question is to Dr. Covey. You said that you once taught at the University of Abuja, if I got you correctly. So how were you able to navigate through the cultural differences? Because you're coming from a society that has a different curriculum, and how do you integrate the Nigerian curriculum? Then my second question goes to Professor Aziz. So how were you able to teach hope to when the teachers' welfareism itself is not being taken care of? Because we're in a society now where everybody is frustrated, and we believe that it's the teacher has a lot of mediating to do. So how are you able to mediate as a tool between the government and the students to maintain peace? All right.
So we're going to get Dr. Conway to respond, and then Dr. Wong can respond, and then we have Dr. Aziz, please.
All right, so in terms of responding to the three questions, number one, yeah, definitely teaching, technology, innovations in technology, important to thinking about. I would urge you all to, the LSA now is forming a new committee on teaching and pedagogy. Elections are happening for that right now. I am one of the people contesting, so please vote for me, but just please vote in general, follow that committee. I hope that that committee will do more workshops, like a monthly workshop or at least a quarterly workshop throughout the year to hit on the importance of teaching for all of us. And then the second question about the kind of MA students, that can be okay if it's in a formal structure. Like here in the US, we have grad student instructors where that's part of the grad student's kind of job in a sense is to teach classes. They're compensated for it, they're paid for it, right? But I think to simply kind of abuse your students and take advantage of them to send them off to teacher courses with no compensation, with no institutional framework to help them be better teachers, to help the learners benefit from these graduate students, that's a problem. And then I think that also that kind of needing those strong institutional frameworks speaks to the third question about teaching at Uni Abuja. It was very challenging in some ways. ASU was on strike for 5 months while I was there, 5 or 6 months. When I arrived at Uni Abuja, I was right away going to teach a postgraduate course, but there were only a few weeks left of the semester. This was under the kind of previous VC, and I know under Nirala, things have improved at the university apparently in terms of institutional structures and so forth. But it was very challenging, although I think the students in the history classes I taught really enjoyed coming to my classes. It was a novelty to have an Oyibo lecturer, right? So they were all, even students who weren't in the class would come just to kind of, look at me, I guess. But it was really good. I last year's LEGO studies, I brought 3 of my former students down from Uni Abuja to LSA, and I made a lot of kind of connections with students there. So there were challenges, of course, but a lot of those challenges were more, I think, institutional or infrastructural than they were kind of cultural. Because I think thinking of the kind of generational thing again, I think so many Nigerian students now at tertiary institutes are connected to the world in the same way that my kind of students are. Like my students and the Nigerian students in the International Virtual Exchange found they had lots of things in common when they did those kind of introductions. And the last thing I'll say really quick so everybody else can talk is that there are 4 more panels, at least 4 more panels focused specifically on teaching at this year's LSA. I posted them over into the chat. There's 1 Thursday, there's 2 Friday, and then 1 Saturday.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Wolf.
Yeah, I can talk about the question, the AI and changing technology. That's a really, really good question. And I think it is something that as university professors, we are all struggling with how to adapt to students using AI on especially writing assignments, which I assign a lot of. So what I don't know if this is the correct answer, and I'm sure, there's been so many articles written about this in higher ed publications, is like just basically trying to tell students how they're going to use it. I think shutting it down completely, I don't know. I've tried that method in the past. I'm not sure how successful that is. And so I basically have them sign something about how they will ethically use AI at the beginning of the semester, understanding the pitfalls of plagiarism involved with it, that it is not meant to generate ideas, but if they want to use it as kind of like an editor, that they can use it in that way, ethically and responsibly. I actually have found that students have used it that way and have used it very successfully, especially students who have learning. It can actually be used to make the classroom setting more equitable if it is used correctly by the students. Like last semester, I had a student with severe dyslexia. And she was she generated all of her own ideas and wrote everything and then would put it into AI to just help clean up her writing. Because her ideas were really good, but because of her dyslexia, you know, the grammar and schematics of writing was something that she struggled with. So it was actually able to help her in that way. So I think, you know, it's this ongoing process. It's something that we definitely have to meet head on and deal with. But it doesn't have to be like the doomsday scenario that some people are making it out to be. We can creatively work. You know, again, this speaks to generational differences. You know, these students now coming in are going to have experience with AI from high school, from middle school. So, you know, just how to incorporate that in a way that you know works the best for what you want to do as an instructor and where they're coming from as students.
Thank you. Dr. Aziz, please.
Yes. All right, thank you so much. I think I'll start with the last question from my sister there. Teaching in an environment where there is very poor incentive. This is one question I've asked myself in the last 26 years. By July, it will be 26 years that I've been doing this job. And I keep asking myself, how have we coped? 26 years. 1998 to date, I've asked myself, is this the only thing that we know how to do? Incidentally, I was working chopper-driven when I left to teach. And that's why I said your philosophy must be based on what your expectations are about life. What do you want out of life? So my motivation for leaving the job I was doing to teach was to impart knowledge to younger people and build the next generation of human beings that will make society better. Also, at the time I was coming into academics, coming into it, I got at least 4 admission letters to go to the US. And the person that my mentor, that's finally a mentor now, another mentor of mine, may so rest in peace, Professor Adewoye, asked me a question. Where are you most needed? Are you most needed in the US or in Nigeria? Answer very, very frankly. And when I look at the situation of Nigeria, I knew that my gifts would be more useful in Nigeria. Perhaps if I had known that there would be technology, I can be teaching across continents, maybe I would have gone. You know, but at that time, it was a personal decision that I said, let's make the sacrifice. Incidentally, by 2017, when I already became professor, I was asking myself, why not leave now? I'm still looking for the reason to leave. I've not found it. And what has kept me going is that I have now discovered the other side of teaching, which Prof mentioned, community service and research became where I latched on. So I do some consultancy outside related to my field. And so when there is, the low time, I tell myself there are other options. So I'll tell you, no matter what course you are teaching, your services are needed outside. You must find a way to connect with the society, so where your knowledge and skills are needed. That way, you continue without losing sight of what you're doing, without making your students suffer. You understand, you have to create that balance. Because at the end of the day, you go to the same market with those who work with NMPC. You still have to give your children the best of life. So you need a balance between that teaching now and outside. And I think it's the same way everywhere. So that's how I've survived. Now, master student teaching. Yes, is a legitimate thing, because masters, or if they are doing their PhD, that means they are training to become teachers. And so you have to give them that opportunity. You understand? That's why we have graduate assistants, because you have to, we must have identified that that person has a love, a passion for teaching. Then that person needs guidance. What should not happen is that don't leave that person to just flow. You must, the drawing up of the course content, everything must be done by you, and then you monitor as a senior person to say this is what we're doing, and then you go to class once in a while so that they see you working. For instance, I don't allow any graduate assistant or assistant lecturer to teach my first year students. I must be in class because that is the foundation. So I don't leave that foundation to anybody when colleagues are assigned to me. So it's allowed, you understand, but I should be monitoring. Then technology. I think a lot has been said about technology. Every one of us must, up our games and then be part of it. It has its positive side and it's more than the negative. How we tap into the positive side remains for us to now work on as teachers. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I think we have only 4 minutes left, so I'm going to try to round off. I think folks can actually continue the discussions online. We don't have time anymore. It's 4 minutes left. So I want to emphasize 3 things from the panel. One, I think there's sort of a general consensus that teaching and instruction is something that one has to reflect deeply about in terms of what your objectives are. What are the goals of teaching? And that is often, as is the tradition in many US institutions, you have to have a syllabus, which I think for many folks in Nigerian universities, there's a difference between a syllabus and a course outline, which you go and dictate in class and then students make up the rest of it. So I think that's a very critical element and aspect of teaching in Nigeria that should be taken seriously. Second, as Dr. Wolf mentioned, is the idea of teaching as a process and as a continuous process. Even at every level, you have to understand that your teaching philosophy is malleable, it changes, and you can adapt it to the environment in which you find yourself. And there's also sort of the idea of the mother bird feeding worms to, I think that's great, right? That's really great, because the idea of developing your teachers or your students to think critically, analytically, is something you have to see as sort of drawing them into the teaching and learning experience so that they can discover knowledge themselves, rather than just feeding them, what you want to feed them. That sort of critical thinking, analytical thinking skills comes with making your students part and parcel of the teaching and learning experience. So I think this is really great opportunity for those of us who are here to learn. And I think the possibility of sharing this online so that other people can also learn from your great experiences is great. Thank you very much for those in the United States as you continue your day. And thanks everybody for coming to this session. Please, a round of applause for the president.
Thank you. Bye.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.